The United States Navy operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Every other nation on Earth combined operates 12. Now imagine making the US Navy fight its way through every major fleet humanity has ever built. The scenario: the modern US Navy, 290 combat-ready vessels, 43 submarines, 290,000 personnel, faces 4 historical forces at their peak. The Spanish Armada of 1588, the British Royal Navy circa 1890, the Imperial Japanese Navy on December 7, 1941, the Soviet submarine fleet at Cold War maximum, 1985. 3 rules: no nuclear weapons. Historical fleets fight with their era's weapons and doctrine. The US fleet carries what it carries, roughly 500 Tomahawk missiles, finite fuel, finite munitions. Because historical ships generate no radar return and no electronic emissions, every targeting solution requires optical ID, slower, and not infinite. The question is not whether the US Navy wins, the question is what it costs. Phase 1. The Age of Sail. Spanish Armada, 1588. 130 ships, worth 30,000 men. The gap here is not a generation, it is a geological epoch. The Armada's heaviest cannons were accurate to perhaps 200 yards. A single Arleigh-Burke destroyer's Mark 41 vertical launch system holds 90 missiles. The Armada's entire fleet could not match one destroyer's single salvo. But here is what the Armada's commanders understood that matters: weather. Imagine the original 1588 campaign. Storms off the Scottish coast scattered and sank more of the Armada than the English fleet ever did. Now compress those conditions into a single operational window: low cloud ceiling, degraded satellite uplink, optical targeting fighting a 40-knot headwind. The Armada's galleons, built for exactly these conditions, close the distance faster than the tactical picture accounts for. For 6 hours before US assets re-establish clean targeting solutions, the scenario becomes briefly real. A galleon fires into the confusion. 3 rounds strike the superstructure of a guided missile frigate. No fatalities, but something more important: approximately 18 Tomahawks and 40 air-to-ground munitions are expended against wooden ships. Armada destroyed. 120 ships lost, 20,000 dead. US losses: 0 vessels. Tomahawk inventory: 480 remaining. The Armada lost because it had no answer for range. The British understood that, but the US Navy just burned 4% of its precision munitions doing it. The next wave is not wooden. Phase 2. The Victorian Steel Navy. Royal Navy, circa 1890. 350 warships, 40-plus battleships, 90,000 personnel. This is not the Armada. These men know what they are doing. The Victorian Royal Navy's officers had read Mahan. They understood sea control, choke points, and concentrated firepower. Imagine the Battle of Tsushima, 1905. The Russian Baltic Fleet sailed 18,000 miles and was annihilated in 45 minutes. Now reverse it. A modern fleet hunting 350 dispersed steel warships by optical mass in heavy weather, each requiring its own targeting solution. The munitions cost is real, but here is what the Royal Navy missed. Closing range was the right instinct, but the engagement ceiling was still too low. 3 cruisers maneuver under overcast, running without lights. They close to 8,000 yards. They fire. 4 rounds strike a US destroyer's superstructure. 2 crew members are killed. First American fatalities in this scenario: Royal Navy annihilated, 280 to 320 ships lost, approximately 60,000 dead. US losses: 2 killed, 1 destroyer dry dock. Tomahawk inventory, approximately 420 remaining, 16% expended across both phases. Mass still has a voice. Even outclassed mass properly coordinated can reach you. The Japanese understood this, but they brought something more precise than mass. Phase 3. The Imperial Japanese Navy. IJN, December 1941. 10 carriers, 12 battleships, 36 cruisers, 113 destroyers, 63 submarines. The Imperial Japanese Navy was not a historical curiosity. It was a precision instrument built around one objective: find the American carriers and neutralize them before they can launch. Its long-lance torpedo, oxygen-propelled 22-mile range at 36 knots, was the finest surface torpedo in the world. Its aviators had logged more carrier combat hours than any force on Earth. They had a plan. And part of it still works. Imagine Pearl Harbor. 6 carriers, 353 aircraft, 2,400 Americans dead in 110 minutes. Now apply that same planning logic not to a fleet at anchor, but to a fleet in the moment of launching its own strike. Carriers turn into the wind. Speed drops. The defensive envelope contracts. 63 Japanese submarines fan outward and wait for exactly that moment. One I-class boat closes to 1,800 yards on USS Gerald R. Ford during flight operations. It fires 4 Type 95 torpedoes. Countermeasures deploy. 3 are decoyed. The 4th strikes the hull. Gerald R. Ford does not sink. It is out of the fight for 3 weeks. US losses: 1 carrier battle damaged, 1 destroyer sunk, 47 killed. IJN losses: surface fleet destroyed, 35 submarines sunk, 40,000 50,000 casualties. Tomahawk inventory below 300 rounds. Aviation munitions at 55%. A capable enemy with a coherent plan imposes costs even when it cannot win. That is not a consolation, that is a warning. The 4th wave was built by men who studied every lesson in this scenario and designed an entire navy around one word the first 3 waves never learned: patience. Phase 4. The Soviet Submarine Fleet. Soviet Navy, 1985. 375 submarines, 180 plus nuclear attack boats. Everything up to this point has been visible. This phase is not. By 1985, the Soviet Navy operated 375 submarines. Roughly 180 were nuclear attack boats, Victor, Alpha, Akula class, capable of 35 knots submerged and dive depths no US surface weapon could reach. The Alpha class was built from titanium. It was designed by engineers who assumed they would be outnumbered, outgunned, and outsmarted on the surface, and who decided none of that mattered if you could never be found. These are men who spent the Cold War running silent beneath the North Atlantic, tracking American carrier groups for weeks without surfacing. They were not afraid of a modern fleet. They had never been afraid of anything. Here is what the Soviet doctrine understood that the previous 3 waves did not. The carriers are not the target, the supply chain is. Imagine a convoy of fleet oilers running 200 miles behind the carrier group, enough fuel to keep the air wing flying for 72 hours. A Victor-class submarine running at depth with a reactor at minimum output puts 2 torpedoes into the lead oiler. The fuel doesn't burn. It simply stops existing as an operational resource. But here is what the Soviet fleet missed. Submarines running silent cannot coordinate. Wolfpacks that sank the oilers didn't know the carrier group had altered course. The Soviet fleet fought brilliantly in isolation and incoherently as a whole. Over 21 days, US forces sink 260 to 290 Soviet submarines, but the remaining 85 to 115 boats have done their work. The logistics chain is cut. Tomahawk inventory reaches 0 on day 17. The Soviets do not sink the US Navy. They starve it. For the first time in this scenario, the United States cedes the operational area. Soviet losses: 260 to 290 submarines, 80,000 to 95,000 personnel. US Phase 4 losses: 5 ships sunk, 2 carriers mission killed by fuel exhaustion, approximately 340 additional personnel killed. Final verdict: the Armada was dismantled in hours. It cost 4% of the missile inventory and proved even an impossible mismatch has a weather window. The Victorian Royal Navy cost 2 lives and another 12% of precision munitions, and proved that a fleet you cannot target cleanly is not a fleet you defeat cheaply. The Imperial Japanese Navy battle-damaged a carrier and killed 47 men, and proved a coherent doctrine can reach you even when it cannot stop you. The Soviet submarine fleet did not win. It forced a withdrawal no previous wave had managed by attacking the fuel and ammunition instead of the warships. Total US dead: between 390 and 430 personnel, 8 ships sunk or mission killed, precision munitions at 0. Total historical losses: 150,000 to 200,000 men across all 4 fleets. The kill ratio is extraordinary. Somewhere between 350 and 500 enemies killed for every American lost. The US Navy wins every engagement. It does not hold every ocean. Here is the real lesson. The US fleet was not beaten by firepower. It was beaten by supply. Every navy that lost a prolonged campaign lost it the same way. The Armada, the Kriegsmarine, the Imperial Japanese Navy. Logistics failed before the warships did. The Soviets understood this better than anyone and built their entire doctrine around attacking the supply lines rather than the carriers. Against a patient, distributed enemy willing to absorb catastrophic losses to cut the resupply chain, 500 Tomahawk missiles have an end date. Dominance is not a permanent condition. It is a temporary answer to a question that keeps changing.